All great changes begin not with a bang, but with a breath. A quiet exhalation into the shared air of the world. It all began with a whisper, an almost imperceptible shift in the ancient rhythm of life and death. It was a story that started so quietly, we couldn't hear it over the noise of our own lives. It was a footnote on a Tuesday, a statistical anomaly in a sea of data, a single ripple in an ocean of activity. We were deaf to the prologue of our own undoing. It found its first vessel on a crowded bus, lurching through the arteries of a city that never slept. A simple cough, muffled and dismissed. The person who cast it into the air was no villain. They were just tired, heading home after a long day, thinking of dinner, of sleep. They felt a tickle in their throat, a weariness in their bones they blamed on the season, on the workload, on life itself. Around them, dozens of other worlds spun on. Each passenger lost in their own private universe of music, text messages and daydreams. No one looked up, no one flinched. In that shared recycled air, an invisible passenger disembarked and found new hosts, the transaction as silent and seamless as the passing of a shadow. It was the first of a billion unseen handshakes, a covenant made without consent. Later that night it announced itself as a fever, a heat that felt like any other common ailment, a simple cold, perhaps the flu, the kind of illness that warrants a day off work, a pot of tea, and the certainty that it will pass. It was an inconvenience, not a threat. The thought of anything more sinister was impossible, a plot from a movie, not a reality to be confronted in the quiet of one's own bedroom. This intimate personal denial was a mirror of the collective one that was to come. We had long since learned to medicate our symptoms, to silence our body's alarms, and to carry on. And so, the first patient, and the next, and the one after that, did just that. They carried on. No one noticed at first because the world was a symphony of glorious distraction. The great hum of human life was a force of nature in itself, a constant percussive rhythm of progress and ambition. Cars, like blood cells, flooded the concrete veins of our cities. Children's laughter echoed from parks and playgrounds, a sound we took for granted, believing it to be a permanent fixture of our world. In skyscrapers of glass and steel, deals were made, futures were traded, and the digital pulse of the global economy beat with reassuring strength. In lecture halls, the next generation absorbed the accumulated knowledge of the past, confident in the predictable trajectory of the future. We were a species in perpetual motion, defined by our momentum. To stop, to listen, to look for subtle signs of fracture was to be left behind. The sheer scale of our creation was a source of immense pride. We saw our sprawling cities, our intricate supply chains, our instantaneous global communication, and we called it strength. We saw a world bound together by flight paths and fiber optics, and we called it resilient. We had tamed rivers, split the atom, and walked on the moon. We truly believed we had built a world that was too big to fail, too complex to collapse, too sophisticated to be brought to its knees by something that couldn't even be seen. We mistook our complexity for invincibility. We thought our world was a fortress, but nature, the system we thought we had mastered, had a different plan. It works on a different timescale with a different definition of power. The agent of this change was not an army, nor an asteroid, but a tiny, unseen thing, a biological machine of terrifying simplicity. It was a fragment of genetic code, wrapped in a protein shell with a single relentless purpose, to replicate. It had no malice, no consciousness, no strategy. It was simply a key, evolved over millennia, that had finally found its lock. And the lock was us, our cells, our bodies. Our interconnected society was not a fortress. It was the perfect, fertile ecosystem. A silent, efficient arrival was underway, a biological coup d'etat happening in the lungs and bloodstreams of a population that was utterly, blissfully unaware. It would show us with brutal clarity just how fragile our bustling world truly was. Our strength, our density, our love of congregation, our global transit was about to become our greatest vulnerability. The systems we built were so tightly wound, so interdependent, that the failure of one small component could trigger a cascade of catastrophic collapse. Our world was not a fortress. It was a web, and a single vibrating strand was about to make the entire structure tremble. It was a pane of glass, beautiful and clear, about to be struck by a stone. The change, when it finally registered on our collective consciousness, was slow, and then terrifyingly sudden. The first news reports were easy to ignore. They spoke of a new flu, a localized outbreak in a city whose name was difficult to pronounce. It was a story buried deep within the news cycle, a brief mention between politics and sports. Most people did not listen, or if they did not hear. We had heard such stories before, Bird flu, swine flu, SARS, Ebola. They were specters that had haunted the headlines for a few weeks before fading away, always contained, always someone else's problem. We had developed an immunity not to viruses but to warnings. At dinner tables around the world, the news was noted with a passing comment, a shrug, and then the channel was changed. Life was too immediate, too demanding, to worry about distant threats. But then, the numbers grew. The data began to tell a story that was impossible to ignore. Behind the scenes, in the quiet offices of epidemiologists and public health officials, a dawning horror was taking shape. The whispers of concern became a frantic shout. The charts, once showing a gentle incline, suddenly bent upwards, forming the terrifying near-vertical line of an exponential curve. This wasn't a brush fire, it was a global conflagration, and the wind was picking up. The language of the news reports sharpened. Outbreak became epidemic. Concern became emergency. The shout was finally starting to cut through the noise. The sick were not getting better, not in the way we expected. Hospitals, the bastions of healing, began to transform into front lines. The first few cases were medical curiosities. Then they were a worrying trend. Then they were a flood. Hallways filled with beds, staff worked double, then triple shifts, their faces etched with a fatigue so deep it seemed to settle in their bones. The sound of the modern hospital, the gentle beeps, the calm announcements, was replaced by the desperate mechanical hiss of ventilators and the constant urgent cry of alarms. The fortress of modern medicine was under siege, from within. Then came the decrees, the official acknowledgments of failure. First, the schools closed. The announcements came suddenly, giving children one last, strange day to say goodbye to friends they wouldn't see for months, or longer. They left behind classrooms filled with half-finished projects and hallways that fell into an unnatural silence. Then, the offices told people to stay home. The global engine of commerce sputtered and seized. Millions packed up their desks, offering awkward socially distanced farewells, stepping out of the humming hives of productivity and into an uncertain future of remote work and isolation. The great towers of finance and industry stood dark and vacant, monuments to a way of life that had been suspended overnight. The hum of the world began to fade, the roar of morning traffic thinned to a whisper. The skies, once scarred by the white trails of jetliners, grew vast and empty. The trains sat idle in their stations. The machinery of our civilization, the noise we had always equated with life itself, was grinding to a halt. One by one, the lights of the human world were being switched off. The silence that followed was not peaceful. It was not the gentle quiet of a sleeping world. It was a heavy, suffocating silence, thick with absence and anxiety. It was the silence of a held breath, the silence of a world waiting for the other shoe to drop. It was a profound stillness, punctuated only by the wail of a distant siren, a lonely sound that spoke of the ongoing battle being waged in the quiet rooms of hospitals and homes. This new quiet was filled not with peace but with a growing collective sense of dread. We had silenced our world to save ourselves, and in the quiet, for the first time, we could hear just how fragile it had always been.